Okay, so I would like to thank I'm part of the organizers, but the real organizers, I would say, for setting up this meeting in this very nice place. The program is to talk about numerical methods which are used in molecular dynamics and in statistical physics. And I will talk about two kinds of problems. One which is sampling the canonical distribution, so sampling a measure on a high-dimensional space, multimodal measure typically. So this will be more or less 1/3 of the program. And then I will spend most of the time on part 2, which will be about sampling paths. Okay, and this is also related to the first part, because in both cases you have to use stochastic dynamics. Okay, and the stochastic dynamics to sample the canonical distribution is used to make averages, to use the ergodicity of the dynamics to approximate averages. And in the second part, this dynamics is interesting in itself, and you would like really to look at the path of these dynamics when you go from one state to another one. And this will make connections with large deviations, because basically it's about looking at the rate functional on this kind of stuff. So let me maybe introduce the context of what I'm doing. So I'm working with biologists or physicists who are interested in systems that describe at the atomic level, so at the atomistic level. So they look at particles which interact. So there is the main parameter, the main modeling parameter is a potential, so a function V, which to a given set of positions will associate an energy. Okay. And with this, with potential V, you can build many models. Okay, you can build measures, you can build dynamics. Okay, and the idea with these models is to infer from this microscopic description some macroscopic quantities like heat capacity or typical macroscopic states. These are the kind of quantities you are interested in. Okay. And there are applications in many fields, like in biology, physics, chemistry. So it's used now also in pharmaceutical companies in order in drug design of this kind of applications. So the idea is really to build some kind of numerical microscope to look at matter at the atomistic level, okay, and to look at what is going on at this very small scale. So the main, one of the big criticism you can do about all this numerics, which is used in many fields and which consumes a lot of CPU time now, is how this potential V is built. Okay, this potential V is built using what is called empirical rules. It's empirical force fields. Okay, and so they are designed on experiments, on computations which are done electronic structure computations. Okay, because the idea is that the xi's are the position of the nuclei. Okay, and you would never be able to compute exactly how the electronic cloud is around these nuclei. Okay, so you would like to do some approximations to understand what is the energy associated to a given conformation of the nuclei. And so the way this approximation is done is typically by postulating some pair interaction, maybe sometimes triple or quadruple interactions, depending on the atoms you have. If you have carbons, oxygens, etc., okay, you devise some interaction rule, if you want, okay? And of course, this is the main modeling ingredient. So if you are doing something very wrong, really wrong here, what you will get out of that is something bad. Okay, so there is here some, let's say, knowledge how to design good force fields, and so there are people, many people working on that, physicists, chemists, in order to make things reasonable, let's say. Just to have an idea of what is going on here, for this pair interaction, what you could have in mind is a function of the distance between the two particles you are looking at, okay? And typically, this potential V1 as a function of the distance has this shape. So this is the celebrated Lennard-Jones potential. So it's repulsive at small distance. Yeah, then you have an equilibrium distance, and then at larger distances, it's completely flat. So you have no interactions when particles are far apart. Okay, that's typically what you could have in mind. Okay, so now from this V, so I will not talk about V anymore. I will assume that D is given to me as a mathematician. I will not work on how to design a good V. Maybe there are questions in mathematics going on here in doing, learning strategies to get better potentials. But from now on, V is given to me, and I would like to compute things with this V, okay, and to compute macroscopic quantities. So with this V, what we will first do is we will make a dynamics. Okay, so this is the simplest dynamics you can do, which is a dynamics which will conserve energy, so the kinetic energy plus the potential energy. It's a Newton equation of motion. So you have the derivative of the positions. So xt is a large vector which contains all the positions of all the atoms. And the derivative with respect to time is equal to the velocity. So it's the inverse of the mass times the momenta. And the momenta vector, okay, is the derivative of this momenta vector is what is the force, and the force is minus the gradient of the potential V. Okay, so this is the simplest simple Newton equations. So in many cases of interest, and this is where noise comes from, you are interested in systems where the energy is not conserved, but the temperature is conserved. So it means that the energy is conserved in average, okay, and you have a temperature which is fixed by a bath around a thermal bath, okay. So one way to represent this is to add this what is so-called Langevin thermostat. So what is this term? The blue term here. You have a friction term here, which is minus gamma the velocity. So it's a friction, so it dissipates some energy, okay? And then you have plus square root of 2 gamma, the same gamma as there, time beta minus 1, so beta minus 1 is kT, okay, the Boltzmann constant times the temperature, times the Brownian motion, okay? So with this additional term, under a reasonable assumption on the potential V, you can show that these dynamics will be ergodic with respect to the measure which is written here. So it means that when you do averages with respect to trajectories, with respect to time over trajectories, okay, you will get an average with respect to a measure which is written here, okay, which is what is called the canonical measure. So you have here exponential minus beta the potential V, time exponential minus beta the kinetic energy. Okay, so it's exponential minus beta the total energy actually. Okay. So this is a boring part because it's just a Gaussian term, so you don't care about this one. So what you care about is really the mu here, which depends on the V. Okay. So on this slide you have the two models we will be looking at in these lectures. So there will be this mu, okay, which is a canonical measure. So how to make averages with respect to mu. This will be the first part of the talk. And then the second part of the talk will be how to sample efficiently trajectories of this dynamics. Okay, so how to see rare events associated to these dynamics. So sometimes it's difficult to work with Langevin dynamics for mathematical reasons because you have noise only on the velocities, on the momenta here. And so we will also consider sometime a simplified version of this Langevin dynamics, which is obtained when gamma is sent to infinity or when the mass is sent to 0. Okay, that's two ways to go to this dynamics. And then you obtain this so-called overdamped Langevin dynamics. Okay, so sometimes we will work also with this dynamics. Okay, so these are the two. So maybe I can write this so that you can keep an eye on these quantities. So there is this measure, okay, and then there is this dynamic. And again, this simplified overdamped Langevin dynamics is ergodic with respect to the measure mu. So it's only dynamics in position space here. Huh? And if you make averages with respect to you will obtain averages with respect to mu, okay, in long time limit. And mu is invariant for this dynamics. If you start on the mu, you will stay on the mu. Is everything clear on this slide? Everybody is okay with this WT? Maybe I should have said that it's the Brownian motion. I hope it's clear for everybody what is this guy. It's the same here. Okay. So, as I said at the beginning, we would like either to make averages with respect to mu, or we would like to make averages over paths, okay? So what are the difficulties? There are two difficulties numerically. The first one is that it's a high dimensional problem, so it's the number of particles is really large, okay? So the vector xt is very large, is a high dimensional vector. So it means that you cannot do simple averages using integral discretization to compute averages, okay? And the second difficulty that I will explain in more details in the following is that xt is a metastable process and mu is a multimodal measure. So what does this mean? So mu is a multimodal measure. It means the following. It means that if you look at this measure mu, typically what you have is that you have wells in V, or you are regions which are really likely, okay, and which are separated by regions which are not likely at all, okay. So these are called modes, okay. So the picture you should have in mind is some places where this measure mu is very places that this measure mu favors, let's say, which are separated by deserts, let's say, okay, places which are not favored at all. And related to this difficulty, the xt, the process xt, is metastable, okay. So what does it mean? It means that the process xt will stay more in the regions which are more likely, okay? So typically what you will observe on this process xt is that it will spend a lot of time in some metastable regions before hopping to another metastable region, okay? And so the typical time it will take to go from one metastable region to another one will be very large, okay? That's the second difficulty numerically, okay? So it means that, for example, if you want to compute an average with respect to mu by doing an average with respect to time over the process xt which is there, okay, you will need very large capital T to get something reasonable, okay? And if you want to look at averages over paths, okay, typically the part of the paths you are interested in is those paths which go from one metastable region to another one, okay? And these are very rare events, okay? It's very difficult to observe them by doing just a naive discretization of the dynamics and waiting for this event to happen, okay? So just, again, it's a high dimensional problem, but to have a picture of what is going on, I just draw on this slide a simple 2D examples, okay? So on the first row, okay, on the first line here, you have a potential in dimension 2, which is represented by its level sets. And you have, as a function of time, the first coordinate, so the x coordinate of a process which evolves over this potential energy, okay? So what you have here is that you have two wells, one here, one there. And so what will happen is that you will stay for a very long time here before going there, okay, of course. And so what you observe is really that on this picture, you see that you stay for a very long time around 1 before going to -1, okay? And you switch from 1 to -1, okay? And so this time can be arbitrarily long if I send beta to infinity, so if I send the temperature to 0, okay? So this is metastability. I stay for a very long time on the left or on the right, okay? This is called energetic metastability, energetic barrier, because to go from left to right, you have to climb. So you have to go over a saddle point here. Here, in practice, you have also entropic effects, which comes from steric constraints, okay? So it's not related to energy barriers, it's related to entropy barriers. So this is, again, a schematic picture of what is going on in this other case. So you have again the level sets of the potential energy I'm considering now on this second row. And so you see that you have a room here, a large place, which is another one here, and the two are separated by a narrow corridor, okay? And again, it takes some time to go from left to right, okay? And the time here can be made as large as you want if you make this corridor narrow, okay? So that's, and so in these two cases, actually the temperature does not play the same role, okay? If you change the temperature in the first case, so if you go to small temperature, okay, the time to go from left to right will be larger and larger exponentially in temperature. So it's like exponential some parameter over t. Here it's not the same, okay? If you change the temperature, it will only change the time by a linear scaling, okay? So it's not the same behavior, okay? But in both cases, you have metastability. And so in both cases, if you do numerics, okay, to compute averages with respect to time on these paths, it will take a lot of time to get something converged. And if you are interested in those paths which goes from left to right, it will also take a lot of time to observe these paths, okay? To observe these paths is really important in practice because so these states, which are called the metastable states, they correspond in practice to stable states of your system, okay? So metastable states of a system. So states which are observed in practice, okay? Macroscopic states, let's say. Like a typical conformation of your protein or of your molecule. And what you are interested in typically is how you go from one conformation to another one. So it is those paths which goes from one metastable region to another one that you would like to approximate to understand what are the transition states and what are the transition mechanisms from metastable state to metastable states. So here is a small picture of one example I will consider in the following for free energy calculation. So you have a 2D box which is periodic, and you have particles which interact through Lennard-Jones potentials. Okay, so it's a pair potential, so you make a sum over all pairs. And there are two of them which are interacting through different potential, these two black ones. The potential they see as a function of the distance between the two particles is of this form. So it's a double well potential. So you have two states. If you want, you have a compact state and a stretch state, okay? So this is a toy model for a dimer in a solvent, okay? With two conformations, a compact state and a stretch state, okay? Very, very toy model. And you would like to understand how long it takes to go from this state to this state. For example, what is the most likely conformation, compact or stretch? For example, depending on the concentration, so namely the number of solvent particles around for a given size of the box. We would like to compute these kind of quantities, okay? So I will explain in the following how this can be done. So here, the metastable states are, of course, you understood that is this compact and stretch state. If I do nothing, I will stay for a very long time in the compact state if I start in the compact state, or in the stretch state if I start in the stretch state, okay? So let me show you another example. I will come back. So I will come back to this example in particular in the second part of the talk. So it's 7 particles which interact through Lennard-Jones potential again, okay? So here it's really only Lennard-Jones. And I use again the gradient dynamics I've shown before, the one which is on the blackboard. And so here is what you observe as a function of time, okay? So on the left, you have the particles which are jiggling around, okay? And so here is the energy as a function of time, okay? And so I get that you can see that here you are in a state which is the same always, okay? So how to formalize that you are in a given state, okay? The particles are in a given shape, say. What we do on the right is that we take the conformation here, okay? And we just follow this dynamics. So the one without noise, okay? It's minus the gradient of V. So what is this doing? It's minimizing the energy, okay? And it stops when you end up at a local minimum of V. Okay, it's clear? And so you can do that for each time, and you observe here what is the conformation that you obtain at the given time, which is written here, okay, which goes on here. And you see, again, the energy associated this time to this conformation on the right, okay? So these are the metastable states here, okay? The metastable states, in this case, you can characterize them as the basin of attractions for the simple gradient dynamics, okay, of the local minima of V. Okay, this is, yes?
There's a Reynolds interaction and there's a confining potential.
So there is, so in this case, one, I don't remember if we fix the position of one, but everything is, so probably there is a confining potential. Okay, I don't remember exactly. So probably there is a confining potential, I would say. Yeah, they may fly away at some point, yeah. Okay, so this is, and again, so this time, which is very large, so you see that the conformation, the very symmetric conformation that you see at the beginning is the most likely, of course. This is what you observe, and it takes a lot of time to go out of this state, okay? So it's the same problem as before on a problem which is more related, say, to material science. So just to give you an idea of the time scale, so I will not talk a lot about discretization in this lecture, but of course when you go to the computer, you have to discretize in time all these dynamics, okay? So typically what you use is you use an Euler scheme. So if I take these dynamics, for example, you would just do xn plus 1 minus xn is minus gradient of v of xn times delta t plus square root of 2 beta minus 1 delta t times a Gaussian vector with identity covariance, okay? And all these Jn, they are independent, okay, from one to another. And here there is a parameter which is delta t, which is a time step that you have to use, okay? So for the Langevin dynamics, okay, that I presented before and which is the one which is used in practice, the time step that you have to use in order to get a stable dynamics is typically the femtosecond, okay? So it's 10 to the minus 15 second, okay, which is written here, 10 to the minus 15. And for biological processes of interest, so this is an example where you have a ligand leaving a protein. The typical time scale at which you see a change of conformation, for example, the ligand leaving the pocket, can be milliseconds up to seconds, okay? So you see that there is a huge gap in time, okay, to go from the time state that you have to use at the, at the microscopic level to discretize the dynamics, and the time scale of interest at the macroscopic level, okay? So if you do things naively by just integrating in time, it will not work. Okay, that's the basic idea. Okay, so in this first part, I will talk about how to sample mu. Okay, so how to get averages with respect to this measure mu, okay? So it's a high-dimensional multimodal measure, so typically the idea is to approximate this mu by an average over time of a stochastic process which is ergodic, okay? So I will say that an average with respect to mu of a given observable phi will be approximate for a large time t by an average over time of phi of xt, okay? So I arrived this morning at 1 a.m., so I may write wrong things on the blackboard. Please tell me if everything is clear. Okay, so you make here an average over a high-dimensional space, okay, n is the number of particles, and you approximate it by an average over time, okay? But this doesn't work, as I tell you before. It will take a lot of time to get this converged. So how to make these things work? That's the basic question I would like to address now. So I will explain actually one kind of techniques, which is called adaptive Bayesian techniques, which works very well to do that. And this uses the concept of free energy, so that I will first introduce, okay? And in order to understand these techniques, so as an applied mathematician, I am interested in understanding why it works, what is the efficiency of the method, how you can improve it. So here, typically, the way to understand these techniques is to use entropy techniques, okay? So I will explain that in this part, and to look at the rate of convergence to equilibrium of this process, okay? So that will be the way to measure metastability, if you want. Okay? There are various ways to measure the difficulty of sampling. In this part, it will be the rate of convergence to equilibrium, which will be the measure, okay? In the second part, I will talk about exit time for metastable states. And there are other approaches to quantify this. So, in all these analysis of numerical algorithms, what we need as mathematicians is a way to quantify metastability, okay? So this will be something which will come again and again in the talk, how to quantify the metastability of the process xt. So let me explain free energy, so which is one example of an average respect to mu actually, which is very important in practice, okay? And so one quantity people would like to compute, one thermodynamic quantity what people would like to compute is free energy. So what is free energy? So you have this potential V on this measure mu, and to define free energy, I need another function, sorry, which is called sometimes an order parameter or reaction coordinate, okay? So it's a low dimensional function which goes from Rd, so D is free n, okay? It's a number of, it's the dimension of your space. It goes, so it's to a given position of your atoms, it associates a number, okay, let's say. So to have an idea, for example, if you have a simple molecule, it could be an angle, okay? This angle being associated to the conformation of the molecule, okay? Just to have an idea. So you are given this psi, okay? You are given this low dimensional function. And what you would like to use this psi in order to help the sampling of the measure mu, okay? The idea of this psi is that typically it's a slow variable. So it's a variable which characterizes the conformation of your system, okay? And which evolves on very large time scales. So if I go again to the example I've presented before, so in this case, what would be the psi? So what would be the slow variable in my system? It would be the distance between the two black particles, okay? It will take a lot of time to see this psi evolve from this value to this value, okay? If I go in this case, it's maybe more complicated, but in this case, for example, you can take the distance of the ligand to the pocket, okay? That's typically something which will evolve over very large time scales. So this K is given to you, and you would like to use the fact that you know it's a slow variable, okay? So it's something which is difficult to sample, if you want, the psi of xt. To get an average with respect to psi is difficult, an average in time with respect to psi of xt is difficult. You would like to use this information in order to help the sampling of mu, okay? And so in this 2D simple example, psi is nothing but the x variable, okay? It's the first coordinate. And to do that, I need to introduce free energy. So what is free energy? It's nothing but the image of the measure mu by psi, okay? So you have the measure mu, which is on R free n, on Rd, okay? And then you have this psi, okay? Which goes from Rd, say, to the torus, if I consider an angle. And so what you can do is that you can, if you have a random variable x, which is distributed according to mu, okay, you can look at psi of x, okay? Okay, and then psi of x will be distributed according to the image of mu by psi, okay? This is the push forward, if you want. So I denote it by psi star mu. Okay, so this is now a probability measure okay, which is on the torus, okay? So this psi star mu is on the torus, okay? Lives on the torus, it's a measure on the torus. And the free energy is what? It's the energy for which the associated canonical measure would be psi star mu. So this is the definition of free energy. So A is the free energy, and it's a function from the torus to R. And by definition, exponential minus beta A of Z dz will be psi star mu. Okay, that's the definition of A. So if I just do the log on minus beta minus 1, I get this formula for A. A of Z is minus beta minus 1, the log of the integral of exponential minus beta V over all the conformations such that psi of x is equal to Z. Okay, so there is here a measure which appears, which is called the delta measure, okay, which is a measure which is supported by all the conformation H, so that psi of x is equal to Z, okay, and which is such that you have this informal formula, which is that if you take the delta measure times dz, it's equal to dx. Let me go to a simple example to explain this formula. In the simple example where psi of xy is just x, okay, this is just Fubini, okay? In the sense that you just integrate exponential minus beta v in y. This gives you the image of the measure in x, and you take minus beta minus 1 the log to get the a, okay? This is the formula in the simple, the color code is that when you have purple colors like that, it's a simple 2D case where psi of xy is equal to x, okay? So in this simple case, it's just a Fubini. Okay. In more complicated situations, you have this delta measure which come into the picture, okay? And it's related to the co-area formula in geometric measure theory. Okay, is it clear, this quantity, this free energy? If you have questions, do not hesitate to, yes?
The next page, next slide. What is v of xy? I thought v is a function of one variable.
Yeah, so in this case, I'm in the 2D case. Okay. So I just write explicitly that x is xy. I should maybe write x1, x2.
Okay, so you're constraining by this psi just one variable.
Exactly. So when I'm doing this a of x, I'm really looking at conformations where I fix the value of psi. So here the value of psi is x, okay? So if I try to plot the 2D potential here, what I'm doing is that I fix the x, and for a given x, I integrate in y, okay, exponential minus beta v of xy. This gives me a function of x. I take minus beta minus 1 the log. This is the free energy, okay? That's the definition. And in general, it's the same, except that it's a little bit more complicated because you have geometry coming into the picture because the psi is not just a finite. So you have the delta measure, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's the same idea. So this is one measure I will talk about in the following. This is the image of the measure mu by psi and the free energy. There is another family of measures which is important to understand these adaptive algorithms, which are the probability measures conditioned to psi, okay? So maybe if I go again to the 2D case to make things simple, if you look at the measure mu in 2D here, I can do another thing. I can say I'm interested in the measure mu given a value of x, okay? So it's a probability measure which is supported on this line. So this time you do not integrate on y, you fix x and you look at how it depends on y, okay? And this is, if you look at this measure, okay, mu given psi, you get this formula. It's exponential minus beta v of xy dy, okay? And then you need to normalize it in order to get a probability measure. So to normalize it, you just integrate the numerator. And if you integrate the numerator, by definition of A, it's just this, okay? Okay, so that's the second quantity I would like to introduce. And this is the general formula, not in the general case. You have exponential minus beta v, again this delta measure, divided by exponential minus beta a, the a which is there. Okay? Bon. So here is a slide on this delta measure if you want to understand a little bit more what is this delta measure. So this delta measure is defined by this actually this, if you want, conditioning formula. So if you have two test functions phi and psi, and if you take an integral of this type for any phi and psi, it can be written in this way using the delta measure. So basically, you can integrate by slice. Okay. If I want to integrate over RD, I integrate for a given psi in the submanifold sigma of z, where psi is fixed to z. Okay. And then I integrate in z. Okay. And here, since phi only depends on psi, it goes out of the integral here. Okay. So that's the formula which defines this delta measure. Okay. So if this doesn't ring a bell, I mean, there is another way to look at this. It's just by using regularization. So if you take a delta, an approximation of identity, so this delta epsilon is a function which goes to which approximates the Dirac in dimension 1. Okay, it goes to delta 0. You can show that the limit of this is exactly this. Okay, so this is another way to understand also the notation, the delta here. Okay. So on one small subtlety in here is that it's not the Lebesgue measure on the submanifold induced by the Lebesgue measure in RD. Okay, so I can give you more details on that if you're interested in that, but there is a subtlety here related to the fact there are two measures which are naturally defined on this manifold. So in the affine case, there is no problem, both are the same, but when you have geometry, it's not the same. For people who knows about microcanonical measure, it's the same problem, the same picture that you should have in mind when you look at delta H, okay, where it depends on the gradient of H, the microcanonical measure on the manifold at given energy. It's the same measure which is there. Okay, so I told you that A is a free energy associated with the reaction coordinate or the collective variable psi. It's defined up to an additive constant like V. Okay, so it's only the normalization when you go to the probability measure which gives you this constant. It's called a free energy because you can relate it to the U minus Ts that we learned for classical thermodynamic. Okay, so but the real link with the free energy, macroscopic free energy, is not completely clear. Okay, it's called free energy. Okay, but to make a link between the microscopic thermodynamics and the macroscopic thermodynamics is not completely, I mean, it's a subject of research. Many people are working on that here. Okay. So just to give a picture of what is going on with this free energy, I give you here what is the result when you look at this problem. You remember this 2D box with Lennard-Jones interaction on a dimer. So two monomers which interact with this double well potential. And so I take psi, it will be the distance between the two black particles, okay? And so this, as a function of psi, I would like to compute the free energy, okay? So I look at the free energy over this window. Okay, this is what is showed here. Okay, and so you have two pictures because you have two concentrations. Okay, so depending on the number of particles around, you will get two different energies. Okay, so this is one result. This is another one. Okay, you have the original potential, double well potential, which is the dotted line, the dashed line here. Okay, so it's this that you see. Okay, and then you have the free energy, which is the solid lines. So you have error bars. So this is what you have two lines, but it's a Monte Carlo computation, so you have error bars. And so what you can infer from that is that the stretch state here is more likely than the compact state, and the other way around at another concentration. Okay, so that's the kind of information you are interested in when you plot free energy. You would like some kind of low dimensional representation of your system, okay, to to say if it's a high-dimensional system, I cannot see anything in the original problem. So if I just choose a few degrees of freedom which are of interest for me, so these are the psi, what would be a good potential V, okay? And thermodynamically, the A is exact, because averages with respect to A, exponential minus beta A, will give you exactly averages with respect to exponential minus beta V, okay, for the psi degrees of freedom. So it's a way to see what is going on simple on lower dimensional problem, okay? There is also here a barrier to go from left to right. You see, you have a barrier to go to this. And so physicists, they also would like to infer from this barrier some transition times. Or this is another story, okay? This is another problem because here comes into the picture dynamics, okay? And so the question now is, if you look at that, is the free energy a good potential in order to get an effective dynamics? Okay, so this is another question. Okay, you would like to understand if doing a dynamics on this black 1D representation, okay, would give you a good approximation of the dynamics psi of xt. Okay, and so this is not completely clear. Okay, it's clear that exponential minus beta A is exactly psi star mu. It's not clear that if I do a 1D dynamics replacing V by A, I will get something reasonable. Okay, so this is another. Ouais.
So what you call slowness of the variable, can it be seen anything in terms of these measures or is unrelated? What is
Slowness, you said?
of the variable
Yeah,
psi?
yeah. So it's a little bit hand waving. Okay, so. This, I mean, the psi is really a degree of freedom. So if the point of view of physicists or biologists say is that the psi is a degree of freedom you are interested in, okay, which gives you the conformation of your system, okay. It's an angle, it's a distance. It can be also a 2D or 3D combination of distance, angles, and this kind of stuff. Okay, so that's. And as a mathematician, I say it's a slow variable because I typically, since this psi characterizes the macroscopic state of your system, typically it will change value, the value of psi will change on time scales which are much larger than the discretization time scale I used at the beginning. Okay, so this is why I'll call it a slow variable. Okay, so the psi of xt typically will evolve with change values over time scale which are much larger than the discretization time scale. This is why I call it slow variable. Okay, does it make sense? But I will give in the following more precise definition of what is a good psi from a numerical viewpoint, at least. Okay, but I mean, in the literature, devising a good psi, so devising a good reaction coordinate is the subject of many papers, because for complicated systems, how to characterize the macroscopic state and how to find a good way to index the transition from one state to the other, this is the psi, is not easy in some cases. So that's
choice of the.
Alors, the interest of the energy is that you don't have to think about it; you have it, so it's easy to use. So one difficulty with the energy is that a priori you don't really know over which scale it evolves. So let me make a picture. If you have this picture, you start here and you say, okay, I will use the potential V as a slow variable, okay? And so I will. I'm a little bit anticipating about what I will do in the following, but I will help the system to visit these values of psi. So this value of the potential energy. You see, it's not enough because it doesn't go over this barrier. Okay, but I mean, and then if I do that, so it's enough. I mean, you will, but it's too much in the sense that you will visit regions which are not likely at all. And so when it comes to make averages with respect to mu, you will give weight, you will obtain conformation with very low weight with respect to mu, okay? So the main difficulty with the potential V is the fact that it's not easy to devise a good range, okay? To know a priori if you want the height of the saddle points. That's okay? But, I mean, in the original Wang-Landau algorithm, I will talk about Wang-Landau. If you look at the 2000 paper of Wang-Landau, they use the energy. Okay, so it's not a crazy idea at all. I mean, you can do that. It's just that in many cases, it's not enough. But so other question about this free energy. It's clear. So it's a low-dimensional effective potential. Okay, if we want to put it short. So many computational time is devoted in order to compute this free energy. It's really one example of a quantity like that, because it's a quantity like that, if you want, with a phi, which is a delta, okay? And with values phi, you have, with varying the phi, you have the free energy. So it's the thermodynamic quantity people would like to understand and would like to compute. For the ligand protein system, it's really important. I mean, you take the distance and you would like to see what they call free energy barriers you have to go through in order the ligand to go out of the pocket. Okay, so that's really a lot of time is spent on computing this free energy. And so there are many methods to do it, okay, which have been devised. And I will talk only on this adaptive technique, okay? But I would like you to keep in mind that there are many other techniques, okay? I will talk a little bit maybe about thermodynamic integration, but there are also other techniques. There are, for example, non-equilibrium dynamics using charging C Crookes inequality, histogram methods, okay. But I will talk about adaptive techniques. So these adaptive techniques have been devised. So the idea is really how to help the process to evolve in the Xi variable, okay? If I do nothing, the Xi of xt remains stuck around some values, okay? I would like to force the system to visit many values of Xi, okay? If I choose the correct Xi, by doing so, I should help the system to visit all the conformations I am interested in, okay? And I've said at the beginning, if I choose the correct Xi, okay? So this is something we would like maybe to understand better. So you can keep in mind this 2D example, okay, where you have entropic or energetic barriers, and you have the Xi, which is just X. So I would like to help the system to move from -1 to 1, or from -4 to 4 here, okay? If I do nothing, it remains around one value. And what is the bottom line of these techniques? The bottom line is the following. If I knew the free energy, A, if I knew A, it would be easier to sample exponential minus beta V minus A, composed with Xi, rather than exponential minus beta V. Okay, that's the bottom line of all these techniques. So I will change the potential V here by V minus A composed with Xi. Okay, that's really the idea. But so before I go more into the details, let's do some numerical experiments. You remember this energetic barrier, okay? This was I already presented before. And so in this simple case, I can compute everything by hand, okay? So I fix X, I integrate in Y, and I do this for many values of X. So this gives me the free energy, okay? So A of X. And this is V minus A, okay? So I compute everything here, okay? So I'm cheating because I don't know A in practice, but I'm cheating here. And so you see that now I have a gentle valley, okay, to go from left to right. And so if I do the same dynamics on this biased potential, okay, I go from left to right easily, okay? So you can tell me, okay, but I've changed the problem because originally I wanted to sample exponential minus beta V, and now I am sampling exponential minus beta V minus A, okay? You're right, I've changed the problem. But what you can do then, to go back to your original problem, is to do importance sampling, okay? So I just write the formula people who don't know that, but it's very standard. So if you want to compute an average with respect to exponential minus beta v normalized by z, so by the normalizing constant, what you have is only averages with respect to exponential minus beta v minus a composed with xi. So it's a of xi. Okay, this little circle is clear. Maybe it's a French notation, I don't know. So a of xi of x. Okay, so what you do is that you simply change the phi. Okay, so instead of using phi here, I use phi of x times exponential minus beta a of xi. Okay, and I just normalize by exponential minus beta a of xi. Et puis après, the same. Okay? So if I know how to sample this guy in blue, okay, instead of doing one average, I'm doing two averages, okay? I'm doing the ratio of the two to get the original quantity, okay? And here you see, I don't put the z because, maybe there is a normalizing factor here, which is a z star, but it's above and below, so it just disappears. Okay? So this is just importance sampling, okay? Importance sampling. So, but yes?
So when you put this example where this psi is equal to x, so is it like just putting a constant force then? Because
yeah, so it's exactly. Yeah. So what I'm doing here, okay, I have only psi of xy is only x. So when I say a of psi of x, I mean a of the first coordinate, x1, let's say, maybe it would be better notation. And so when I do the dynamics which is there, I take the gradient. So I'm just adding a force along x. It's not constant, it may depend on x, but it's only along x, okay? So what I'm saying is that by just adding a force along this direction, I can help the system visit, which is not, I mean, when you look at the picture, it's completely crazy. But that's exactly what is going on, okay?
Finite for this calculation.
Yes, yes, thank you. Yeah, so maybe I should have said that from the very beginning. I didn't wrote that z, which is exponential minus beta v, is assumed to be finite. Okay? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, sorry. And so, as you just said, so this numerator and this denominator, the averages with respect to this biased potential, so this biased measure. And the way to approximate this biased measure would be by doing averages with respect to the dynamics which is there, but v being replaced by v minus a composed with psi. So if you, so if you come to a point, I mean, very good point. So, I mean, I take a psi, which is with value in the torus, okay? And this is not just for fun. It's because I would like it to be compact, so that the z is still finite for the biased measure. Okay, so you are.
Estimated what works.
In general, so in order for this to work, you need either psi to be with value in a compact domain, first situation, or you need, if psi is a distance, for example, you will actually only bias over a range that you fix a priori. And I go back to the question of Stefano before. You have to fix a priori a range on which you will bias, okay? And that's the difficulty for the potential V, because to decide of which range is good is not easy.
It will work for Onsen Hillenberg, but one does not work for Brownian.
So, alors, I mean, for a Brownian motion over RG is not ergodic from the very beginning.
Even R1 is not, it doesn't have a finite.
Exactly. So if you take a Brownian motion on a torus, then it's okay. Okay. But then I would say from the very beginning, I mean, all what I'm saying is useless because it's not metastable. Okay. It may take a lot of time to sample a cube in dimension 10 or 100. But the question I am addressing here is a situation where you would have some regions where you stay stuck for a very long time. Okay, so for a Brownian motion, it's not really the situation. Okay. Yes.
Why do you need to define it?
So
If you can take the coordinate, for example, x or the n,
I will show you in 5 minutes. Okay, why you need it to be finite range. Okay, otherwise it's not normalized. I will show you in 1 second. I just want to do the next example before I answer the question of Stefano, which is the entropic barrier. Okay, because I told you in practice there are energetic barriers and there are entropic barriers. So if I'm devising a method which only works for energetic barrier, it's not useful. But for entropic barriers, what is going on is that it works also basically. So this is what is on this slide. So you take this simple case I presented before. It's not a proof. I mean it's a numerical experiment. But you take this simple case I presented before. Here is the free energy associated to this. Okay, and again it helps to go from left to right. Okay, for this entropic barrier. And now I come to the question of Stefano, why do we need to work with psi with value in the torus or with psi with value in a bounded domain? I mean, why should we only bias over a compact domain? So the answer is here. Because if I take this new measure that I've just built, so exponential minus beta v minus A composed with psi. What you can check, this is really easy to check, is that if you take the image of the measure exponential minus beta v minus A composed with psi, by construction it's a constant. Okay? Because if I just integrate this guy times the delta, I will get exponential minus beta v times the delta psi of x minus z times exponential a of z, and this exponential beta a of z, and this is by definition exponential minus beta a of z. So I get a constant. Okay, and a constant is not very good to make a probability measure, except if you are on a compact domain. Okay, so this is where this.
But the original Gibbs measure would give probability, little probability.
But if I bias, but yes, for a given psi, but in the psi direction, if I let psi goes to minus infinity to plus infinity, in the case psi of xy is equal to x, okay, I will flatten everything.
I want to integrate this respect to the original Gibbs measure and condition.
Yes, but I agree with that. But the problem is that I will not be. I mean, I can define these measures. Okay, they are well defined. They are not probability measures, and so I cannot approximate them by doing an average. So you can define these measures. There is no problem in defining them, but they will not be confining anymore in the psi direction, because by construction they will have this formula.
It's integrable.
Yes. So exponential minus beta a is integrable. Okay, but it's not what I'm looking at here. I'm looking at exponential minus beta v minus a. So what you are looking at is the density of state. What you say is that if exponential minus beta v is integrable, then exponential minus beta a is integrable. This I agree. This I agree. Okay, no problem with that. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if now I replace v by v minus a composed with psi, I may have some normalizing problem. Okay? Because you flatten everything. So this is what is written here actually. So it's just that psi the image of this by psi is a constant. Okay? And so here I'm on the torus, so I can normalize it to make it a uniform measure on the torus. Okay, so maybe for everybody now, what I did with this trick, okay, is this, okay. With this new measure, V minus A, okay, I flattened everything in the xi direction so that the image of the measure, this new measure in xi, is just a uniform measure, okay. So before that, for exponential minus beta V, I had wells, okay, I had high probability regions separated by low probability regions in the xi direction. But with this new measure, they are all the same probability. All the xi values have the same probability, okay? So it's completely flat.
Is this set compact?
Is
this set on which the uniform distribution is going to be compact?
yes. Otherwise, it's really the question that we have now.
Huge problem otherwise. The uniform distribution
No,
over
same torus. No?
Yeah.
It's in the torus typically. So in what I'm saying, I mean, for this talk, to make things simple, think of an angle. Psi is an angle in a protein, in a molecule.
This is basically Gibbs measure.
Yeah. Okay, so then, and you make all the angles equally probable. Before that, you had two conformations. So, you know, we have the chair boat for benzene. I don't know if it's the same for, but you have typical examples of proteins of molecules where you have two or three conformations depending on an angle. Here they are all equally probable now. So I can extend this on, for example, for the distance, so something which is not a priori bounded, but then I have to make the bias only on a finite range. Otherwise, it's not integrable. Okay? It's a little subtlety. I mean, so if you don't follow this, just think of the torus. But okay? Okay, but I'm cheating because I told you, okay, free energy is really complicated quantity. I want to compute it, and here I'm telling, if I had the free energy, it would be great. Okay, so what is the idea? So the idea is that now this is called adaptive techniques because what you will do is that you will learn the free energy, and as you learn the free energy, there will be a feedback loop if you want. You will modify the potential. Okay, so you will. The idea is that you will be in a conformation, okay, in a given initial state. You will learn the free energy around this state. This will give you an idea of the free energy landscape around where you are. You will use this in your new potential to bias your dynamics in order to help you getting out of the state where you are stuck, okay, to visit another new state. Okay, that's really the idea of these adaptive techniques, okay? So a little bit less informal. So here, I wanted to use V minus A. I don't know A, so what I use is that I use a V minus AT, okay, composed with psi, where AT is an approximation of A at a given time t using all the information that you have from 0 to t, okay? I've seen some things from 0 to t, some conformations, okay? I did use from that an approximation of the free energy that I use in order to bias my dynamics, okay? That's the basic idea of all these techniques, okay? And so there are many techniques. If you look at the literature, these ideas have been used in different directions by many people. There is the Wang-Landau algorithm, okay? There is metadynamics, okay? And the one I will concentrate in the following is adaptive biasing force, okay? So metadynamics is, original paper is by Layo and Parinello. Wang-Landau is by Wang and Landau. On ABF, adaptive biasing force, there are two papers, one by Darve and Pau-Riley, and another one by Henin and Chipo, where these techniques are detailed. And they all rely on this idea, but they differ in the way they approximate AT, okay? Okay, so depending on the way you use the information that you have at a given time t, you have different methods. But the basic idea is the same, okay? It's always this, okay? So you can even make some kind of tables to explain all these techniques. So the basic difference between the two methods is whether you learn A or you learn A prime, okay? If you learn A directly, it's called adaptive biasing potential. If you learn the derivative of A, it's called adaptive biasing force because you learn the force, the derivative of a potential, okay? So I will talk about ABF more now. So, I just need one more formula to explain ABF, which is I will learn the derivative. So I need to explain how to compute the derivative. So let me do it first in 2D, in the simple 2D case, because the computation is trivial in this case, okay? I have my original formula, a of x is minus beta minus 1, the log of the integral exponential minus beta v xy dy. Again, xy has the two coordinates of the vector x in dimension, here in dimension 2. So this is the free energy I've presented before. And I want to to differentiate, to take the derivative of this with respect to x, okay? So if you do that, you take a prime of x, so you have a derivative with respect to x, and the integral is only in y. So you have the log to differentiate first, and then in the integral, the dx goes inside, okay? And when you do this computation, okay, so it just the average, actually, it's integral of dxv, the partial derivative of v in x, times exponential beta v dy, exponential beta v dy here, okay? And if you look at this formula, it's very nice because here you recognize a probability measure, okay? It's just the conditional measure, mu given psi, okay? And this is completely general. I mean, if you use the delta measure properly, you can show that a prime of z is the integral of a function f with respect to the conditional measure mu given psi. I wrote here the formula with this measure, the conditional measure, and I wrote here the probability notation if you want. So it's expectation with respect to mu of f of x given that psi of x is equal to z. And what is f? Okay, this little f is this formula. Okay, so you see it's something complicated in general. And if you take psi of xy is equal to x, you find again just the partial derivative in x, okay? But in general, so this is called sometimes the local mean force, and a prime is called the mean force, or maybe it's minus a prime, which is called the mean force, depending on the paper you are looking at. So what you have to understand from this slide is that the derivative of the free energy is the conditional expectation of a function that you know given psi. This is what I need in the following, okay? I give here proof in the general case. If I can give the slides to, probably it will be. So my little f is this complicated, but it's complicated, but it's completely analytic, okay? So you give me a v, you give me a psi, I give you f, okay? It's completely analytic. So now comes the dynamics I will look at, adaptive dynamics. So this is what you would like to do. If you knew A, you would use instead of V minus A composed with psi in the dynamics, in this dynamics there, okay? You replace V by V minus A. And actually what you need is a gradient, okay? Because so you need only A prime. On A prime, I showed you that it's just a conditional measure, okay? And now there is a simple remark, which is on this slide, which is that if I take the conditional measure for the measure which is biased by a AT, so V minus AT, okay? Instead of taking the conditional measure with respect to V, which is the formula I have shown you before, I take a V minus AT here. And what I'm saying is that it doesn't change anything. Why? Because it only depends on psi, this AT composed with psi. So if I have the delta measure here, it goes out up and down, and it just cancels. Okay? So what I'm saying is that the conditional measure of the biased potential, where I used the V minus AT, okay, is the same as, but does not depend on AT. Okay? So if you have this remark in mind, you will understand immediately what I'm doing here. I'm just here replacing the A by AT, okay? AT prime being defined by this conditional expectation, okay? So this is the dynamics I will look at. So what you do is that at a given time t, you look at the conditional expectation, but not with respect to mu, but with respect to the law at time t of xt, of f of xt given psi. And this you use in order to make a feedback loop to your dynamics xt. Okay? And now the question mathematically is AT prime converging to A prime in the long time limit, first? And second, is it better? How better is it compared to just taking the original dynamics and making a sampling? Okay. So do I obtain a better convergence, okay, rate of convergence than by using the original dynamics? Okay. So I will let me show you some simple experiment on that. Looking again at this this simple example of the dimer in a periodic box. Okay, so this is the simulation where you do nothing. Okay, so you have the dimer in a box, and it just, evolves. It just evolves without doing anything. Okay. And now, so it's a periodic box. Huh? So sometimes you may see the beads there and there, but they are closed because everything is periodic. Okay. So if you do nothing, you start in the compact state and you stay in the compact state. And now I do IBF. So meaning that I learn the free energy and I see what is going on. So I start in the compact state. Okay, it's red. And you see that then I go to the stretch state, I learn the free energy in the stretch state, and then I will go freely from compact to state. Okay, that's typically what is going on. So if you want to have a picture of what is going on with these techniques, you can think of an ant, like computational sand. An ant which starts here, okay, which fills this. Okay, and then go there, fills there, and then go from left to right. Okay, and if I take this black shape and I just put it, the other way around, it's just the free energy. Okay, so that's so what I have to add in order to get out of the metastable states is really the free energy. Okay, so this is a picture of what is going on. Alors, okay, so I have 15 minutes to explain a little bit of mathematics. So what we would like to understand is, we would like to answer these two questions. So, does AT prime converge to A prime? And what did we gain compared to just using this simple dynamics? Okay, that's the two questions we would like to address. In order to address these questions, I will use one point of view. There are others, but I will use a PDE point of view, a partial differential equation point of view, where I look at the evolution of the law of xt. Okay? So in this very simple setting, you can show that xt has a density with respect to the Lebesgue measure, and I call this density psi. Okay? So xt has a density psi of t. Okay, so xt is distributed according to a psi t of x dx. Okay? And you can show that this psi evolves according to this dynamics, which is called the Fokker-Planck dynamic. Okay, so you have dt psi is the divergence of the drift, minus the drift, so it's this, times psi, plus beta minus 1, div of grad is Laplacian. Okay, and this is just related to this Brownian motion. Okay, so this is how evolves the law of xt. Okay, I go from this to that directly, and I can also write what is at as a function of psi. Okay, more precisely, so this formula here can be written explicitly in terms of psi because it's an average at a given time t. Okay, so it's just integral of f psi the delta divided by the integral of psi the delta. Okay. So what I would like to understand basically is the long time behavior of this Fokker-Planck equation, okay? And the difficulty is that it's non-linear. Why it's non-linear? Because the psi is hidden in the IT here, okay? Okay, so it's not trivial to look at the long-time limit of this. So I've shown you that it works already. So in order to analyze this, okay, one way to do it is to look at entropy techniques. So let me explain in a few slides what you can do. And for this, in order to explain how the nonlinear dynamics goes to equilibrium, I should first explain how the linear dynamics goes to equilibrium. So I go back to the linear case, the simple case which is there. I just replace the x by a q, not to not mix things. Okay, so here I look at the original gradient dynamics. Okay, the associated Fokker-Planck, which is this time linear. Okay, and here I ask again, what is the long-time behavior of this? Okay, so this dynamics is ergodic with respect to exponential minus beta v normalized. So we expect phi to go to this phi infinity. Okay, and the question is how fast it goes to phi infinity. Okay, so in this linear setting, you have many ways to address this question. Okay, and probably the most precise way is to look at spectral properties of this operator. Okay, which is actually self-height point if you look at it on the right L2 space. But in order to address the question of the nonlinear case, the spectral approach is not very good. Spectral techniques is more for linear setting than for nonlinear setting. And entropy techniques is actually better. Okay, so let me explain how entropy works on this simple case. So the entropy is what? You look at the entropy or the relative entropy of the density at time t with respect to the measure at to the long time limit, phi infinity. Okay? So the integral is the integral of the log of phi over phi infinity times phi. Okay? And so this is relative entropy of phi with respect to phi infinity, and you can show that it is a measure of the distance between phi and phi infinity. Okay? More precisely, for example, you have this inequality which tells you that the total variation distance, so the L1 norm of the difference, okay, is bounded from above by the square root of the entropy. Okay? So if I show that the entropy goes to 0, okay, I show that phi goes to phi infinity. Okay? For physicists in the room, so maybe there is here a difference in terms of signs. Okay? So in math, we like entropy which decays and goes to 0. Okay? So it's a plus here. Okay? And so to understand the long time of behavior of E of t is quite easy. Okay, I just here do a simple rewriting of the Fokker-Planck equation. So this is exactly this equation here. Okay, rewritten in terms of phi infinity. Okay, so you can check that this is equivalent to what I wrote before. Okay, and now you can make a very simple computation. Okay, to show that if you take the derivative of the entropy with respect to time, so it's this formula, because when you differentiate the log, it disappears because the integral of phi is equal to 1. So you just have this. You replace dt phi by the divergence here. You integrate once by part, so you have a minus which comes into the picture here. And you end up with this formula. Okay? So you take that, you observe that the derivative of the entropy is non-positive, so E is decreasing, the entropy is decreasing. Okay, that's the first thing that you observe. The second thing that you observe is that you have minus beta minus 1 something, the integral of the gradient of the log of the ratio square times phi, and this is a quantity which is called the Fisher information. Okay, so it's a quantity which is which depends on phi infinity again. Okay? So you have the derivative of the entropy, which is minus beta minus 1, the Fisher information. Okay?
How do we know that P infinity is well defined?
How do you know that the entropy is well defined?
P of infinity is going to be the limit of P of T as T goes to infinity?
Yes. So phi infinity is defined by this. So it's the same question as before.
Oh, that's a Gibbs distribution.
Not the Gibbs. Okay, so I assume that Z is normalized on, okay? I know it here, okay, okay. I'm in a reversible case, I know it, so it's So when you have this equation, which is that the derivative of the entropy, maybe I keep that, so I have the derivative of the entropy of phi at time t with respect to phi infinity, which is minus, take beta is equal to 1, the Fisher information of phi with respect to phi infinity, okay? So what you can show is the following. You can show that actually there is an equivalence between two things. The fact that the entropy will decay exponentially fast to equilibrium in the following sense. You have that the entropy at time t is bounded from above by the entropy at time 0 time an exponential minus, let's say, RT. I take beta is equal to 1 to make things simple here on the blackboard. Okay? And this is equivalent if you have this for all initial conditions and for all t. It's completely equivalent to the fact that the entropy, that for all probability density function phi, the entropy of phi with respect to phi infinity is bounded from above by 1 over 2, 1 over r. So if I go back to my slides, I put a 2 here everywhere, the Fisher information. Okay, so this is the important things to get from this slide. You have an equivalence between an exponential decay of the entropy and this functional inequality. Okay? So if you want to go from this to that, it's really easy. Okay? It's basically Gromval. Okay? So if you have entropy which is bounded from above as the Fisher information, it means that minus the Fisher information is bounded from above by minus the entropy. Okay? And you just do Gromval to get the result. Okay? And if you want the other way around, why does this imply that? Okay, you just differentiate this inequality around t is equal to 0. Okay, so you make minus the entropy at time 0 left and right. You divide by t, and you send t to 0, and you will get this for phi which is equal to phi 0. Okay, so it's just, I mean, so you can say that this capital R is a measure of the rate of convergence to equilibrium. Okay. It's a measure of the metastability in some sense of your system, of your process. So metastability means that R is very small. Okay? And actually you can quantify that because this R, which is called, so this is called a logarithmic Sobolev inequality. Okay? And you can compute this R for values phi infinity. Okay? And you can show that if phi infinity has a double well structure, okay, the R is exponentially small in the height, in terms of the height of the barrier when the temperature goes to 0. Okay, so it's, I mean, this explains why I said that metastability is associated to a small r. So this, okay, yeah, thank you for this question. So, what is the typical assumption that I need on phi infinity in order to get this? Okay. So typically, so phi infinity, remember, is just the Gibbs measure. So it's just exponential minus beta v normalized. So typically, if you have a v which goes sufficiently fast to infinity at infinity, then you have a logarithmic Sobolev inequality. More precisely, it has to grow at least quadratically. Okay, so Gaussians or better than Gaussians is okay. Okay. Confining potential typically, or also in many cases actually torus, because people are using a lot of periodic boundary conditions. But so if you are compact, of course, you have also a log sub inequality. So the difficulty is not in practice to know if you have a log sub inequality. This under reasonable assumption is okay. To get what is really R for a given potential, this is complicated. Okay, but the idea is that the more metastable your system, the smaller the R. Okay, that's typically the situation. So, in order to summarize these 3 slides, what we can say is that the original dynamics is bad. because the log sum inequality constant is small. Okay, and to make things simple, let's say. So now I would like to go to the ABF dynamics and to show that it's better. Okay, or is it better? So this is, you remember, the Fokker-Planck, which is now non-linear. Okay, and what you can show is the following result. You can show that these dynamics will converge to equilibrium. So here I wrote the result in terms of what I'm interested in, namely the free energy. So AT prime will converge to A prime exponentially fast. It's basically the same result as here. Okay, you have a same kind of rate. But here you don't have capital R anymore. Okay, you have something else, which is the minimum of rho on R. Okay. So let us forget rho for a moment and let's just look at little r. So what is little r? Little r is again a log sum inequality constant, but it's the log sum inequality constant of the conditional measures. Okay? So this is a picture that you should have in mind. You had your original potential, which was bad, in the sense that you had some, so let's take my simple 2D case. You had some energetic barriers to go from left to right, okay? So you have a capital R, which is small, okay? And now what you do is that you take a psi, which is x, okay? And you look at the conditional measures. And there are many of them, huh? It's a family of measures, okay? But if you look at the potential for this associated with this family of measures, each time it's a unimodal potential. Okay, there is no double well feature anymore for a given psi. Okay, so typically the capital R will be the little r will be much larger than the capital R. Okay, so R is the log sum inequality constant of mu, and little r is the log sum inequality constant of mu given psi of x is equal to z, okay, of the conditional measures, okay? So I assume that it's just, there is a one little r for all the z, okay? You can be more refined, but so the basic idea is that you replace capital R by little r, okay? That's what these results tells you, okay? And maybe I can explain. My time is up. Maybe I can take to finish this. I can take maybe 2 minutes to explain why we obtain this kind of stuff. So I take the Fokker-Planck equation for the ABF dynamic. Okay, and I take it in the simple case where psi of xy is equal to x. I take beta is equal to 1, okay, to make things very simple. Okay, so in this case, what do you have? You have this. So this is the Fokker-Planck equation, huh? So I have dy dYV of psi minus dy psi, okay? And then you have the formula for A prime. The formula for A prime is what? It's the integral of dxv times psi dy. Okay? So this is just the nonlinear Fokker-Planck equation which is there, okay? Written in this very simple setting where psi of xy is equal to x and beta is equal to 1. Okay? And I just do one line of computation to finish. I look at what is going on in the x direction. So namely, I integrate psi in y. Okay? So I would like to understand what is going on in the direction of the reaction coordinate. Okay? And you will see the magic, which explains why things work, why this result works. So you take this and you integrate in y. Okay? What? So dt psi becomes dt psi bar. Huh? So psi bar is just the integral of psi in y. Huh? Okay? Then you have the dx. So since it's a derivative only in x, you have the integral which comes inside the derivative. So you have integral of dxv times psi minus a prime of x times psi bar. Then you have the minus dxx psi bar. And then you have integral in y of derivative in y. So this disappears. Okay? And here, if you look at this, there is a magic. Okay? Because a prime of x times psi bar is exactly the denominator here. A prime of x times psi bar is integral of dxv psi dy, and it's exactly integral of the integral which is there. Okay, because it's the integral in dy, remind you. So this is equal to 0 by definition of a prime. Okay? I should say it's a prime of t, because it's dependent on time. Huh? It's not the... Huh? So this is 0. Okay, so it means that in the psi direction, you have flattened everything and you just have a heat equation. Okay, and this it comes back to the question of normalization that we had before. For the heat equation to go to equilibrium, you have to be on a compact domain or to so you have to work with a psi which is value in the torus or to fix the range for psi. Okay. And so this explains, this is one ingredient of the proof of this result, okay? And it explains the little r, the little rho, sorry. I changed compared to my slides the rho on the r, sorry. Well, anyway. It explains why there is a minimum here. There is a minimum between the log sub constant which is there and the time it takes to go to equilibrium for just the heat equation on the psi variable, okay? So this is how this proof goes. Okay, so I don't have time to go into more details. Okay, so maybe next time I will finish on that and I will go to dynamics. And I thank you for your attention.